The cameras flashed, the gavel came down, and the preacher of love and brotherhood now stood accused of betraying the very family he created. This isn't another courtroom fight. This is the explosive fall of Kody Brown, polygamous patriarch and now defendant, as secret millions and decades of lies implode under oath. Every one of them revealed, every one of them dragged out into the light. And when the jury finally delivers its verdict, nothing in the Brown family will ever be the same again. All rise. The voice boomed through the packed courtroom like thunder, stilled the soft rumble of murmurs that had filled the room mere seconds prior. Reporters hurried to raise their cameras, the photograph's sharp click of shutters ripping through the air. Each seat was taken. Journalists, fans, doubters, even far-off relatives, all there for what was already being dubbed the trial of the decade. And in the middle of it all, standing rigidly next to his lawyer, was Kody Brown, a once admired patriarch, now a fallen defendant in a multi-million-dollar fraud case that had destroyed the fantasy of family cohesion he preached for decades. The bailiff's voice was firm as the judge entered. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Ellis presiding. Kody's gaze swept around the room, looking for familiar faces. He spotted them. Meri was in the second row, arms crossed and face impassive. Janelle, always the tactician, had a notebook on her lap, jotting down notes even before the meeting started. Christine sat up front, jaw clenched, eyes icy, and next to her Robyn clutched a tissue, wiping away the edges of her tears. Though what was behind the tears, sorrow or fear, no one knew. The man who once prided himself on leading his family through every tempest now stood before a jury of strangers, charged with having betrayed them all. For years, Kody had peddled the world a narrative, one of love, religion, and mutual responsibility. His family was unorthodox, to be sure, but cohesive, or so he claimed. He assured viewers, members of the church, and even his own children that plural marriage wasn't disorder. It was order, structure, and increased intimacy. And for a while, people believed him. They saw his family expand, evolve, and appear to thrive. But behind the smiling faces on television and rehearsed interview appearances, fissures had started to develop. It began innocently enough. A lost receipt or two. A discrepancy in the books that didn't quite add up. Janelle, who had done much of the family's planning, saw the first alarm bell years ago, when a tax return mentioned a business account she'd never encountered. When she questioned Kody, he waved it off. Just a side investment, he'd said, flashing that smooth smile that always seemed to erase questions. But they did not vanish just, they proliferated. Meri started observing that their home budgets were diminishing, yet their earnings had not. Christine became suspicious when Kody explained to her that a property transaction had fallen through, but was not willing to let her see the documents. And Robyn, Kody's legal wife and farthest along in closeness to him, said she had no idea about any hidden accounts. Her lifestyle never appeared impacted by the money shortage that stretched the others. However, it all unraveled on a fall night when Christine found herself in possession of an anonymous email. The heading was direct. Look at this. Included were records, bank records, wire transfers, and emails signed with Kody's digital signature, proof of funds transferred offshore into accounts under shell corporations. Some transfers went back nearly a decade. The sums were astronomical. Hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen from family accounts, business deals, and trust funds for their kids. Christine gazed at the screen, her fingers shaking, betrayal cut deeper than fury. This was not about money. This was about each sacrifice, each compromise, each instant she trusted the man who vowed to govern their family with integrity. That evening, she made a decision, one that would alter it all. She called a lawyer. The word spread like fire. Investigators subpoenaed financial documents within weeks. Kody was called in for questioning. Soon after, the FBI's white-collar crimes unit launched a full-scale investigation. And then the indictment came, multiple counts of fraud, misappropriation of funds, identity theft, and conspiracy. The charges painted Kody not as a misunderstood patriarch, but as a calculating manipulator who had used the trust of his wives, and the structure of their plural marriage to build a hidden financial empire. Now here he stood, face to face with the world, as the prosecution laid out its case. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, prosecutor Elaine Carter started, advancing with an air that commanded the room. This isn't a tale about religion. It isn't about love, lifestyle, or family dynamics. This is a tale about betrayal, deception, and greed. It's about a man who exploited the people closest to him, his wives, his children, his community, and used them as pawns in a plan to get rich. The jury's gaze fell on Kody. He squirmed uncomfortably, his usually confident face faltering for the first time. Carter went on, "We will present you with evidence, not speculation, not innuendo, but hard evidence that Mr. Brown systematically concealed millions of dollars from his family. We will demonstrate that he formed shell companies, forged documents, and altered records. We will demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt that this was not a misstep or an error. It was a crime." Christine watched from the front row, her heart pounding. This was the man she had once loved, the father of her children, the partner she had trusted for decades, now being painted as a criminal. And the worst part, every word felt true. The defense pushed back, naturally. Kody's lawyer, a pugnacious attorney named Victor Hale, stood up with smooth deliberation. "This is a family affair," he stated. "A very complicated family affair that got out of hand. My client has overseen finances for a large family for decades. If there was a mistake, it was an honest one. If money was transferred, it was done to help his family, not because he was malicious or greedy. But all the fine argumentation could not rid us of the facts." The prosecution offered emails in which Kody called his wives liabilities. They demonstrated wire transfers described as consulting fees to businesses that did not actually exist. They offered testimony from accountants who testified that Kody demanded that he personally control all final approvals, even when someone requested openness. The family who once had shared it all, houses, meals, holidays, even religion, was now broken beyond all recognition. Meri refused to meet Kody's eye at all. Janelle, normally level-headed, balled her fists whenever his lawyer uttered a word. Robyn, caught between loyalty and terror, cried silently into her tissue. And Christine appeared to have aged years since the investigation opened, but her eyes never left the man who'd broken her trust. Outside, the world gazed with voyeuristic interest. News channels provided daily updates. Social media was filled with speculation and commentary. Was Kody a selfish trickster, or a misunderstood patriarch? Was this about justice, or vengeance? Within, though, there was no such argument. In that courtroom, under the brightness of lights and pressure of evidence, the truth was all that existed, and that truth was emerging clearer by the minute. Kody Brown, the man who had once founded a family upon vows of oneness, had instead founded a circle of deceit. The judge's gavel came down, calling for a recess, but no one budged at first. The air was too heavy, the tension too oppressive. Kody spun halfway around, meeting Christine's gaze. For an instant, his cool facade crumpled, and something else, fear or perhaps regret, flared beneath the surface. But regret was too late. The trial had started, and there was no return. That once united family which used to claim to reside under one roof was now divided into two sides of a courtroom, and the fight for truth, justice, and revenge was just commencing. And as Kody took his seat, the burden of what was to come lay heavily on his shoulders. The man who used to hold all the power now was a victim of the law, and the gavel that had begun the trial could possibly herald the end of all he had ever known. The courtroom was abuzz with an infectious excitement. The following morning, there were reporters waiting outside from dawn, microphones at the ready to record every gasp, every word, every whiff of drama. Kody Brown's trial, once the proud father of a sprawling polygamous dynasty, had already gotten the public interested, but today was going to be the most volatile day so far. This was the day the prosecution would lay out the evidence, the secret accounts, the forged signatures, The cyber trail of deception that they vowed would prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Kody had planned one of the most deliberate financial deceptions in family history. Prosecutor Elaine Carter stood up from her seat with a calm confidence that came from having prepared for this exact moment for months. She strode towards the center of the courtroom in slow, measured steps, making eye contact with every single juror, as if to remind them that the truth was about to unleash itself upon them. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice firm and unyielding, "what you're about to see is not just a collection of bank records or financial statements. It's a map of betrayal, a trail that begins with trust and ends with theft. And at the center of it all is the man seated right there." She turned sharply toward Kody, who sat stone-faced, jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of the defense table. The first piece of evidence materialized on the big screen behind her, a flowchart of financial activities going back more than a decade. At first glance, it resembled any convoluted financial portfolio. Arrows between accounts, boxes with company names tagged. But Carter identified the purpose of each one with macabre accuracy. This, she indicated, a box marked Brown Family Holdings LLC, was the primary family account. Money from book contracts, TV deals, and real estate earnings all came here. But rather than sharing these monies proportionally, as had been agreed, Mr. Brown funneled large sums into a string of shell companies. The screen changed to show the names Flagstaff Realty Group, Desert Moon Ventures, and Solstice Investments, businesses that, by the time investigators looked into them, had no employees, no offices, and no business activity. They were created for one reason: to conceal money. The jury leaned in. Even the judge's habitual stoicism relaxed into visible interest. Carter went on. From these firms, funds were sent into accounts controlled by Mr. Brown, and from there, they shifted once more abroad. The following slide read off a list of foreign banks based in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Luxembourg. Christine gasped publicly from the front row. She knew of the offshore accounts, but not the extent. The entire amount, Carter disclosed, was over $2.8 million, all diverted from the combined revenues of the family. But Carter wasn't finished. "The most appalling aspect," she said, "is that some of these accounts weren't even in Mr. Brown's name. They were in the names of his wives, without their knowledge or consent." The courtroom fell into whispers. Meri appeared dazed. Janelle clamped her lips into a thin, angry line. Christine slowly shook her head, as if remembering every conversation, every reason Kody had ever offered her. Robyn sat stiffly, her face white, tears forming in her eyes. Carter summoned her first witness, Janelle Brown. Cool and collected, Janelle brought with her a thick binder, her now infamous financial spreadsheets. She had served as the family's de facto accountant, balancing budgets, tax returns, and investment strategies. Her testimony would be pivotal. "Mrs. Brown," Carter began, "can you tell us how you found discrepancies in the family's finances?" Janelle nodded. "I've followed every dollar for more than 15 years. I know exactly what goes in and what goes out. But that one year, I saw $120,000 gone from our real estate profits. When I questioned Kody, he told me that it was invested in another property. But when I looked through the records, there was no acquisition. And then what? It kept occurring," she said, thumbing through the binder. $50,000 was missing here. $200,000 was gone there. Each time, Kody had a reason: taxes, fees, surprise expenses. But there was always a lack of documentation, and when I pushed him harder, he told me to leave him alone. Her voice shook a little on that final sentence, but she remained calm. Carter guided her through more instances: inexplicable withdrawals, forged expense accounts, and strange deposits into unfamiliar accounts Janelle had never noticed before. Every page of evidence added another brick to the prosecution's expanding wall of evidence. And then came the shocker. Carter requested that Janelle examine a document that was being displayed on the screen. It was an application form from one of the overseas accounts, and it was filled out with Janelle's name and signature. "Did you sign this, Mrs. Brown?" Carter inquired. "No," replied Janelle firmly, shaking her head. "I have never seen that document before." Next, the prosecution's expert in handwriting took the stand, affirming that the signature was forged, and that this forgery had purportedly been created by Kody himself. The implication was horrific. Not only had Kody taken money, but he had also posed as his wives to open bank accounts in their names. Kody changed seats, his jaw clenching harder. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but he did not react. For the first time, a crack appeared in his well-rehearsed mask of confidence. Carter then moved on to another witness, a financial investigator named Agent Laura Kim, who had spent 2 years tracing the money trail. The pattern was deliberate, Kim explained. Funds were transferred in small amounts to avoid detection, often just under reporting thresholds. Then reporting thresholds. Some transfers were routed through third-party accounts or cryptocurrency exchanges to obscure their origin. It was a textbook case of layered financial concealment. The jury was enthralled. Each successive piece of evidence portrayed Kody not as a man reeling under financial complexity, but as a masterful manipulator of lies. Kody Brown followed, her very presence commanding the attention of the room before she even opened her mouth. She described finding the emails and the way they destroyed everything she believed she had known about the man with whom she had shared years of her life. Especially said we were in this together, she added, her voice cracking, said every choice was for the family. But while we were fighting to pay for school or medical care, he was stashing money we never even knew he had. Carter opened one of the emails Kody had sent. In it, Kody wrote to a business associate, "We need to move the funds before they get suspicious. Kody and Janelle are starting to ask questions." The room became silent. It was a smoking gun. Irrefutable proof of intent. When the prosecution finally recessed for the day, the air was charged. Reporters in the courtroom sprinted out, yelling headlines into their microphones. In the courtroom, the jurors looked at each other nervously. They had been debating a mountain of evidence, much more than they had expected. And it all led to the same damning conclusion. Kody Brown had not only deceived his family, he had constructed a criminal empire based on it. The defense rushed to salvage the situation. When it came time to cross-examine, they attempted to raise doubts. Kody's lawyer implied that Kody had made up the emails, that Janelle's records were not accurate, that offshore accounts were de rigueur for large family businesses. But the arguments sounded feeble, desperation-stricken, and the prosecution dispatched them with paperwork, timestamps, and testimony. At the end of the session, Kody sat still, his eyes fixed on the gleaming wood of the defense table. He had anticipated resistance. Yes, but not this. Not the crushing power of evidence so immense that even Robyn, the person who had always stood up for him, now did not know what to think. As the judge adjourned for the day, the courtroom erupted into a din. Kody was mobbed by reporters. Janelle hugged her attorney, tears of relief streaming down her face. Meri slipped out unnoticed, not wanting to deal with the cameras. And Robyn, her hand shaking, reached for Kody's. But he pulled it away, his pride hurt, his confidence shaken. Outside, the headlines were already being written. Kody Brown's secret empire, $2.80 million hidden in offshore accounts. Wives betrayed, Brown family trial reveals forged signatures and fake companies. Reality TV star or criminal mastermind. The prosecution had drawn first blood, and deep. The jury had viewed the evidence, cold, irrefutable, painstakingly traced. And although the defense would battle back over the coming days, one thing was sure: the man who had once had control of the narrative had lost it. Now the story was being written by the law, and its next chapters would determine whether Kody Brown walked free or spent the next decade behind bars. The air inside the courtroom felt different as the third day of the trial began. Heavier, more charged. The prosecution had spent days tearing Kody Brown apart, brick by brick, presenting damning evidence of forged signatures, offshore accounts, and hidden funds. The rest of the world had already pigeonholed him as a villain. But now, it was the defense's turn to fight back. And they were intent on rewriting the tale, turning Kody from master criminal to beleaguered father, grasping to keep a failing family dynasty together. Victor Hale, Kody's top lawyer, rose slowly, fastening the buttons on his well-cut suit. His measured, soothing voice pierced the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, The prosecution has painted my client as a monster, a man driven by greed. But the truth is far more complicated. This is not a story of crime. It's a story of chaos, responsibility, and the impossible burden of leading a family of more than 20 people. My client is not a thief. He was a man, a father, a husband, and one who erred, but never in crime. Kody's shoulders squared. For the first time in days, his eyes flashed with a glimmer of confidence. This was the man he wished the world to view. Not an imposter, but an imperfect patriarch struggling to make sense of the tumult of plural marriage, money, and family obligations. To humanize him, Hale summoned his first witness, Robyn Brown, Kody's fourth wife and the sole one remaining by his side. Robyn slowly made her way to the stand, holding a tissue. She looked around the room nervously before her gaze settled on Kody's. "I know him better than anyone," she started quietly. "Kody's not perfect. But everything he's done for this family. He's worked years trying to take care of us, trying to create something stable in an unstable world." Hale leaned forward, his voice soft. "Mrs. Brown, the prosecution alleges your husband stole from members of his own family. Do you think that?" "No," Robyn replied firmly. "Never. If he moved money, it was because he was trying to cover us, to ensure that there was something remaining for the kids, for the future. He was subject to overwhelming pressure. He made choices not because he wanted to conceal things, but because he believed it was the right thing to do. It was just the picture the defense desired. A loving husband, burdened by duty, but motivated by good intentions." But prosecutor Elaine Carter wasn't going to allow that picture go unchallenged. "Mrs. Brown," she started on cross-examination, her voice icy and precise. "You stated under oath that your husband had acted in the family's best interests. So perhaps you can tell me why he opened 3 separate accounts in the Cayman Islands, in your name, without informing you." Robyn stiffened. I don't know." "You don't know?" Carter asked. "You said just a minute ago that he was honest with you, that he informed you of everything. But now, under oath, you acknowledge he opened accounts without your knowledge, accounts which earned more than $400,000. Robyn's eyes welled up with tears. "He must have had a reason," she breathed. Or Carter retorted, "He didn't tell you because he knew you wouldn't approve." The jury shifted uncomfortably. Robyn's credibility, which had long protected Kody, was beginning to break under the load of the evidence. By the time she retreated from the witness stand, the defense's script had already started to come apart. Then came the most daring move so far, placing Kody himself on the stand. It was a risk. If he impressed the jury, he might reclaim sympathy. But if he lost his temper or contradicted himself, it might be too late. Nevertheless, Hale had no option. They had to get the jury to hear Kody out in person. He stood up from his chair and went to the witness stand. The courtroom was quiet. All eyes were on him. "Kody," Hale started, "you've been accused of betraying your family. Is that how you see yourself?" "No," Kody replied, his tone firm but tight. "I think of myself as a man who's devoted his life to taking care of those I love. I've got 4 wives, 18 children, multiple houses, businesses, legal obligations. It isn't easy to manage that. It's chaos. Every move I made, every relocation, every account, it was all about trying to keep this family secure and financially safe." Hale nodded. "Did you ever mean to steal from your family?" "Never," Kody said bluntly. "I wasn't keeping money from them. I was saving for them. I wanted to ensure that if something went wrong, if the show ended, if our income ceased, there would be something in place. I didn't get input on every decision, but I wasn't stealing. I was shielding them." It was a compelling performance, until Carter got up. "Mr. Brown," she started, walking slowly. "You said you were defending your family. Is that right?" "Yes," Kody replied. "Then why?" she continued, holding up a printout. "Did you call 2 of your wives' liabilities in this email?" Kody squirmed in his seat. "That was taken out of context." "Context?" Carter's eyebrows shot up. "What about this message, in which you typed, 'We need to move the money before they catch on'? What context is there for concealing money from the very individuals you're claiming to have been safeguarding?" Kody gulped. "I was under a great deal of pressure." "Pressure don't make people forge signatures," snapped Carter. Pressure don't create shell companies. Pressure don't push money into cryptocurrency wallets under pseudonyms. Those ain't the things that a man defending his family does. Those are the things that a man concealing the truth does. The courtroom fell silent. The jury gazed at Kody intently, their faces emotionless. Carter made the final blow. "Mr. Brown," she asked, leaning forward, "isn't it a fact that the only one who profited from these secret accounts was you?" "No," Kody barked, his voice coming up. "I was doing it for them. They never comprehended the pressure I was under." The tirade resonated within the courtroom, shattering the facade of serenity he had worked so assiduously to maintain. Carter took a step back, pleased. The jury had glimpsed the true Kody, combative, indignant, trapped. As the session concluded, the defense strategy lay in ruins. The credibility of Robyn had been destroyed. Kody's evidence had left more questions than answers. The image of the family man misunderstood had been supplanted by a picture of a man grasping at any opportunity to explain the inexplicable. Journalists hastened out of court to render their judgment. "Kody crumbles under cross-examination" was the headline on one newspaper. Brown's defense collapsing on another. Outside, the public opinion turned even more against him. Inside, the jurors looked at each other in uneasy silence, their faith in Kody's innocence beginning to erode. When the gavel came down, one thing was certain: the defense's bid to change the narrative had boomeranged big time. Rather than salvage his reputation, Kody had revealed just how entrenched the falsehoods were. And as the trial continued, it wasn't only his money that was on trial anymore. It was his integrity, his reputation, and the very integrity of the family he professed to protect. The courtroom was abuzz with anxious energy as Session 4 commenced. The prosecution had already decimated Kody Brown's credibility step by step, and his catastrophic testimony during the last session had only added to the destruction. The defense was trying to cast him in the role of misunderstood patriarch, but what came across was defensive, manipulative, and highly unreliable. Now, attention turned to one of the most eagerly awaited moments of the whole trial: the introduction of the spreadsheets compiled by Janelle Brown, a painstaking year-by-year analysis of the family finances that promised to reveal the truth in black and white. Janelle took the witness stand with quiet confidence, as if she had been waiting years to do this very thing. Of Kody's 4 wives, she had always been the most financially savvy, the one who monitored every penny, juggled every budget, and kept their large, unorthodox household afloat. Today, she was more than a witness. She was the prosecutor's wild card. "Mrs. Brown," Prosecutor Elaine Carter started, "you took care of the finances of the family for many years, yes?" "Yes," Janelle asserted. "I did budgeting, bill-paying, taxes, and long-term financial planning. With a family like ours, it wasn't just a matter of needing to. It was necessary for survival." "And did you keep any of these records?" "Every single transaction," replied Janelle. "For almost 2 decades, I kept spreadsheets of income from the TV show, book contracts, real estate transactions, and family businesses, and every expense. Mortgage payments, utilities, tuition, healthcare, name it." Carter spoke to the screen in back of her. "Let's see Exhibit 42. Janelle's fiscal year 2019 spreadsheet of finances." The screen came alive with a line-by-line ledger. Columns of numbers, colored and crisply formatted, chronicled the family's expenses month by month. It was the type of proof that didn't depend on sentiment or inference. It was hard, cold facts. "Mrs. Brown," Carter indicated a column highlighted in yellow. "What does this notation signify?" "That," Janelle answered, "is a $250,000 withdrawal from the family's main account. It was never added up. There is no matching expense, no investment, no purchase of assets. It simply disappeared." "Did you question Mr. Brown regarding it?" "Several times," she replied. "Every time he told me something different. One time, he said it was for a business investment. Another time he said it was for attorney fees. But there were no records to back up either reason." Carter advanced to the next slide. "And this $180,000, same thing," Janelle replied. "It was withdrawn in small amounts over a period of months. No reason, no records." Jurors sat forward, examining the spreadsheet intently. The defense attempted to object, arguing that the data was subjective, but the judge sustained them. Janelle's records were detailed, extensive, and above all, verifiable. And then the bombshell moment. Carter presented a string of emails on the screen. Communications between Kody and a financial advisor. In them, Kody spoke of the missing money in appallingly matter-of-fact terms. "We have to transfer the funds before anyone even realizes it," one read. Christine and Janelle are already getting suspicious. A collective gasp swirled through the courtroom. Kody shifted restlessly, his eyes flashing toward the jury. The prosecution wasn't merely establishing that money was gone. They were establishing intent, Mrs. Brown? Carter asked. "What was your reaction when you saw these emails?" Janelle breathed in deeply. "I was horrified. I trusted him. We all did. And to see him talking about us as obstacles, and realize that he was actually actively concealing money from his own family, it was a gut punch." The prosecution then moved on to the Coyote Pass property, a family's most important collective investment. Janelle laid out how the family had all agreed to use TV revenues and book proceeds to buy up and develop the land as a future inheritance for their children. But development had inexplicably ground to a halt, with Kody holding firm that they didn't have the money to continue. "Mrs. Brown?" Carter inquired. "Did you ever learn what had become of the money appropriated for the Coyote Pass project?" "Yes," she replied. "It had been diverted. Close to $600,000, meant to go into the project, was funneled into one of Kody's own accounts. He then used that cash to purchase a property in his and Robyn's name only." The disclosure caused shockwaves in the room. The jury looked at each other in stunned silence. Robyn's face blanched, and Christine shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was real. It was on paper. It was irrefutable. The defense scrambled to catch up on cross-examination. Victor Hale attempted to depict Janelle as a scorned ex-wife out for revenge. "Mrs. Brown," he paced slowly, "you were never really a financial professional, were you?" "No," Janelle answered calmly. "But I managed a household of more than 20 people for 20 years. I know where every dollar went." "And isn't it true," Hale went on, "that you and Mr. Brown had arguments about how money was spent?" "Sure," she replied. "But arguments don't excuse stealing." Hale then attempted a different approach. "You're angry, aren't you? Angry that your marriage broke up. Angry that Mr. Brown decided to remain with Robyn." Janelle didn't blink. "Angry? Sure. Betrayed? Totally. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because millions of dollars went missing. Money intended for our children, our home, our future. And I mean to see justice served." Her reply fell with the force of a hammer blow. Even some jurors nodded slightly, obviously shaken by her composure and conviction. Carter wasn't finished. She brought a forensic accountant to the witness stand, a reserved woman named Dana Lee, who had spent months poring over the Brown family's finances. Her testimony was devastating. "Based on my analysis," Lee said, "approximately $2.8 million was diverted from family accounts into accounts controlled solely by Mr. Brown over a 10-year period. These transfers were structured in a way that concealed their origin, often routed through multiple accounts before landing offshore. This is consistent with deliberate concealment, not poor bookkeeping." "Could these transactions have occurred without intent?" Carter asked. "In my expert opinion, no," Lee answered. "They took planning, coordination, and know-how about how to evade financial detection." By the time she had finished her testimony, the courtroom was heavy, as if the evidence itself weighed down upon them. The spreadsheets, the emails, the testimony. They all created a picture not of a man attempting to protect his family, but of one who was lying to them systematically for years. Kody's mask of calmness was unmoved when the judge asked for a recess. But the clenched jaw, the fists in his hands, betrayed the tempest raging within. His legal strategy was disintegrating. His version of himself as a misunderstood patriarch was being torn apart by the cold, painstaking evidence to the contrary. Outside, the media circus went into full swing. Headlines blared from every screen. Spreadsheet of betrayal: Janelle exposes hidden millions. Coyote Pass money stolen. Jury stunned. Brown empire built on lies. Inside, the atmosphere among the wives was worlds apart. Meri was devastated. her face a picture of shock. Christine remained still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Janelle was composed but couldn't disguise the sorrow in her eyes. And Robyn, still faithful but now visibly shaken, refused to meet Kody's eye. The entire day had been the prosecution's. Their story was linear and watertight. Kody Brown hadn't merely committed mistakes. He had deliberately planned a financial deception over a decade in length, deceiving his wives and kids as he amassed a hidden fortune in their absence. And as the jury exited the courtroom, most of them looked at Kody with a different look, not mere suspicion anymore, but revulsion. The figures don't lie, and neither do the papers. What once was an elusive, deceitful web was now glaringly apparent. The courtroom was ominously quiet when Session 5 started. Yesterday's questioning had been disastrous for Kody Brown. Janelle's spreadsheets, the forensic accountant's breakdown, and the incriminating paper trail of clandestine transactions had sent the defense scrambling. But there was no way Kody or the courtroom could have anticipated what came next. Christine Brown appeared in court today, and everybody knew that her testimony had the power to make or break the case of the prosecution. Christine was not your typical witness. She wasn't another ex-wife or angry former partner. She was the woman who had stood with Kody through years of marriage, brought children into this world with him, created a life with him. Her betrayal stung the deepest because she had once believed in him most. And now, she was ready to destroy the very persona he had worked so hard to create. When Christine entered the courtroom, the mood changed. She had on a plain dark dress, no jewelry, no makeup, a calculated attempt to convey authenticity and genuineness. But underneath her calm exterior was turmoil. She did not make eye contact with Kody as she reached the witness stand. He looked at her with a set jaw, as if attempting to silently remind her of the years they had spent together. But Christine did not look back. She had decided. Mrs. Brown, Prosecutor Elaine Carter started softly. You and Mr. Brown were married for almost 30 years. Tell me what that marriage was like. Christine sighed quietly. The first year, it was all that I imagined it would be. Kody was charming, charismatic, dedicated, or so he appeared. He spoke of family, of oneness, of love, and I believed him. We all did. But after a few years, I began to notice a different side of him, one that was controlling, secretive, and manipulative. The room was quiet. Carter walked deliberately, allowing Christine room to go on. What do you mean by controlling? Everything was in his control, Christine said. The finances, the decisions, the future. If we complained, he said we were ungrateful. If we inquired about money, he said we didn't know. Gradually we gave up asking, because every question became an argument. He had created a system in which he was the only person who knew the truth, and we had to trust him in blind faith. Carter nodded. And did there come a time when you started to wonder about that trust? Christine's face grew hard. Yes. It was after I discovered an email. It wasn't addressed to me. It had been sent to a business associate of his. In it, Kody boasted about shuffling money around and said, "They'll never see a dime." He was referencing us, his own wives. That is when I knew that all he had spoken about coming together and trusting him was a lie. The words hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Even the jurors who had spent weeks listening to evidence seemed shaken. Kody shifted uncomfortably, whispering something to his attorney, who placed a hand on his arm to calm him. Carter carefully retrieved a printed copy of the email and handed it to Christine. Is this the email you're referring to? Christine glanced at it and nodded. Yes, that's the one. Can you read the section with highlights out loud to the court? Christine gulped hard and started reading. I've already transferred the money before they can ask questions. Christine and Janelle are suspicious. But it doesn't matter. They'll never get a dime. Gasp filled the courtroom. Journalists frantically wrote notes, and the judge intervened to call for order. Carter paused a moment before going on. How did you feel when you read that? Christine's voice trembled a little. I felt foolish. I felt cheated. I had trusted this man with my life, my children's future. And meanwhile he was laughing behind our backs, treating us as obstacles rather than partners. Carter leaned closer. Mrs. Brown, did you accuse Mr. Brown of this email? Yes, Christine answered. I confronted him directly about it. He initially protested everything. He told me I was being hysterical, that I was misunderstanding what he said. But when I presented him with the facts, he blew up. He screamed at me, accused me of attempting to destroy him. That's when I knew he wasn't sorry. He wasn't even embarrassed. He thought he was above it. The prosecution then turned to another pivotal issue. Coyote Pass, the family land that had been the site of so much dispute. Christine described how Kody had persuaded all the wives to invest in buying and developing the land, assuring them that it would be their family's legacy. But years down the line, nothing was constructed, and the funds had disappeared mysteriously. Kody said the project was put back due to funding issues. Christine testified. But we now know that funds were siphoned off, spent purchasing property in his and Robyn's names. He stole our dream and invested in a future without us. Prosecutors presented new evidence. Internal communications between Kody and a real estate agent where he spoke of the Coyote Pass property as a distraction and made plans to sell it off surreptitiously. It wasn't the money alone that betrayed Brown. It was personal. Mrs. Brown, asked Carter, was this in your view about control or money? Christine didn't waste any time. Control. Always control. Kody didn't want the money. He wanted the control it brought. He wanted to determine who got what, who was entitled to more, who could stay and who needed to go. He wielded money like a weapon, and we were all too afraid to fight. Now Kody couldn't remain quiet anymore. He leaned over his lawyer, grumbling under his breath. She's lying. She's distorting everything. His lawyer quieted him, but the jury had already seen. His frustration, his lack of control, was increasingly obvious. The defense tried to push back during cross-examination. Victor Hale attempted to paint Christine as a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge. Mrs. Brown, he said, you've been very vocal about your dislike of Mr. Brown since your divorce, haven't you? Christine didn't flinch. I've been vocal about the truth. And isn't it true, Hale continued, that you've written a book and done several interviews about your life with Mr. Brown, all of which paid you money? Yes, she replied icily. And every word that those interviews contain is true. Hale attempted again. Isn't it also true that you and Mr. Brown did not see eye to eye on the future of the family back when all of this was starting to occur? Of course we did, answered Christine. But disagreements don't excuse lies. They don't excuse concealing millions of dollars. They don't excuse betraying the people who trusted you. Her self-control in the heat of pressure impressed the jury strongly. Even when being questioned fiercely, she didn't change. She was consistent and unshakable. Her testimony didn't ring like revenge. It rang like someone finally speaking the truth after all those years of silence. As Christine descended from the witness stand, the courtroom erupted into a whirlwind of whispers. Reporters scrambled to get word out to their editors. Not even the judge's gavel was able to quiet the hum. Kody glared at her as she passed by him, his face a combination of anger and incredulity. For so many years he had dictated the story, but today, for the first time, someone else was writing it. Outside the court building, news agencies screamed breaking news. Christine Brown reveals Kody's betrayal in shocking testimony. They'll never see a dime, Kody's own words come back to haunt him in court, and family legacy stolen. Coyote Pass bombshell shakes trial. Inside, the prosecution momentum was unrelenting. Christine's testimony had not only confirmed the money trail evidence, but had also delineated a heartbreaking profile of Kody's character. A man who not only violated laws, but also broke the very individuals who trusted him most. And as the trial ended, one thing was certain to every person in the courtroom. The jury wasn't simply determining if Kody Brown had committed financial fraud. They were determining if a man who had made his fortune on love and trust had actually used that trust to annihilate the very family that he professed to protect. The evening courtroom doors closed behind everyone, but the whispers of Christine's words, "They'll never see a dime," hung like a ghost over all. Kody's empire was beginning to fall apart, and for the first time he resembled a man who understood it. The courtroom was more oppressive than ever. As Session 6 commenced, the tension was no longer hovering in the air. It was etched on every look, every hushed conversation, every fidgety shuffle from the jury box. The prosecution had constructed a monolith of a case brick by brick, and Christine's bombshell testimony had struck like a sledgehammer, shattering Kody Brown's defense to its very foundation. But this session wasn't about evidence or spreadsheets. It was about human collateral. It was raw emotion, broken loyalty, and the disintegration of a family that had preached harmony to the world. And as the courtroom awaited closing arguments, the individual stakes had never been greater. Kody hunched at the defense table, slumping his shoulders, his once boastful swagger now restless fidgeting. His lawyer Victor Hale tried to speak to him in whispers, but Kody hardly reacted. He was older now, his face haggard and his eyes bloodshot. The empire he'd spent a lifetime constructing. The TV stardom, the houses, the real estate, the image so painstakingly constructed of a plural family based on faith, was crumbling around him, and the individuals tearing it down weren't strangers or adversaries. They were the women he used to refer to as his wives. The hearing started with the testimony of Meri Brown, Kody's first wife. Meri had been a complicated presence in the family for years, intensely loyal but emotionally remote, frequently on the periphery of Kody's attention. Today, however, she was someone who had been both witness and victim to his choices. Meri, prosecutor Elaine Carter started, how would you characterize your relationship with Mr. Brown over the course of many years? Meri let out a slow breath. Complicated. At first, we were business partners. We had dreams, plans, and a vision for our family, but as time passed, I felt like I was disappearing. Financially, emotionally, spiritually. Kody made choices that impacted all of us, but he never consulted us. It was his domain, and we were simply living in it. The courtroom fell silent. Meri's voice was firm, but a profound sorrow underlay every sentence. Did you know about the financial choices Mr. Brown was making? Carter asked. No, Meri answered. I wasn't involved. He always told me he'd take care of everything. When I asked questions, he would tell me, don't worry about it. But we did worry. We all did. We just didn't realize how bad things were. Did you ever think he was stashing money away? Meri's eyes fell to the table. I suspected many things. But when you're in a marriage like ours, when one person has all the power, you learn to quiet those suspicions. You say to yourself you're imagining things, you want to believe in the person you married. Her words were piercing. They weren't so much about money. They were about control, manipulation, and betrayal. And they gave a heartbreaking picture of the psychological hold Kody had had over his wives for so long. Leon Brown, the child of Kody and Meri, was the next one on the stand. Their evidence provided another twist to the tale, one that wasn't so much about accounts or property, but about trust and family relationships. Leon Carter asked, how did your father's behavior impact the family? Leon paused, looking over at Kody for an instant before responding. It pulled us apart. We were raised on the importance of unity, on family being paramount. But as we grew up, we saw the cracks form. We saw how he treated Mom. We saw how money was used as a weapon. And we saw him privilege one wife over the others. Do you mean Robyn? Yes, Leon said sternly. Things were different once Robyn was around. Dad told us that we were all equals. But it was obvious who came first. The rest of us, our mothers, were just the way. The term obstacles was in the air like venom. It was a word borrowed from Kody's own messages, the ones in which he had referred to Christine and Janelle as liabilities. Now, it was coming from his own daughter. Prosecutors used this witness testimony to make a larger point. This case wasn't merely about financial deception. It was about an individual who had used trust and loyalty for profit and domination over those closest to him. But the defense wasn't finished yet. They had one more opportunity to influence the jury, and they knew they would have to tug on every emotional string possible. Victor Hale rose and started his closing series of questions with Robyn Brown, trying to make Kody sound like a guy under tremendous stress instead of a heartless planner. Mrs. Brown, he started slowly. You've been through all of this with your husband. What would you tell people who think he's a monster? Robyn's voice shook. He's not a monster, he's human, he's made mistakes. Some big ones. But he's not evil. He's a man who tried to do too much for too many people. He wanted to build something beautiful. But he got lost along the way. Do you still love him? Tears accumulated in Robyn's eyes. Yes. I do. I hate what he's done. But I love who he is. The jury split. Some jurors softened, but others were unmoved. The prosecution protested, calling Robyn's testimony irrelevant emotional manipulation, but the judge did not overrule it. It was a deliberate gamble by the defense. One final appeal to humanize Kody before the verdict. Then came the most dramatic moment of the trial so far. During a heated cross-examination, Kody, already on edge, lost his temper. Carter had been pressing him about the forged signatures, asking why he had signed Janelle's name on a bank document without her consent. At first, Kody deflected. Then he grew defensive. And finally he snapped. "I did what I had to do," he bellowed, pounding his fist on the table. "Do you have any idea what it's like to support an entire family on your back? To make every decision, every compromise, while they all sit there and criticize you? I constructed everything. Everything they have. And this is how they thank me." The courtroom exploded. The judge pounded his gavel over and over, calling for order. The jury was wide-eyed. The wives, all four of them, were aghast. And finally, for the first time, Kody appeared to see just how much harm he had caused to his own cause. His mask had fully slipped, exposing the anger, resentment, and sense of entitlement that lay underneath. Carter took the opportunity. "Ladies and gentlemen," she addressed the jury. "You just heard it come from his own lips. This wasn't about family. This was about control. This was about power. This was about Kody Brown, thinking he was above being held accountable." The judge called for a brief recess to restore order, but the harm was done. That tirade would play on every cable news show, every social media outlet, every front page. It wasn't proof. It was a confession of integrity. When the court reopened, it was subdued. The prosecution read their final few pieces of evidence: transfer timelines, doctored documents, additional emails, but they were hardly needed now. The narrative had already been penned. The jury had witnessed the facts, heard the evidence, and watched the breakdown of a man who had put his family at odds with him, and then attempted to rationalize it. As the evening came to a close, the judge informed the group that the jury would soon start deliberations. The wives sat side by side, not as competitors, but as partners. For the first time in years, they were reunited again, not in matrimony but in mission, to hold Kody accountable for what he had done. Kody sat quietly, alone. Even Robyn, who had stood up for him so strongly, was now estranged from him, her mind preoccupied. Reporters screamed out questions and flashes blinded, but Kody said nothing. He sat forward, his expression blank, as if attempting to force himself into the belief that this wasn't happening. It was happening. The money, the deception, the betrayal. All of it was now exposed before everyone. And as the gavel fell to mark the close of the session, one thing was certain: the man once who ruled his family with command and assuredness was no longer master of his destiny. Next time that he appeared in the courtroom, his destiny, his liberty would be at the mercy of 12 strangers. The courtroom slowly evacuated, and an eerie silence remained. It was the quiet of a family torn asunder, of a man confronting the consequences he had been running from for decades, and of a narrative no longer his to dictate. The next installment would be the last one, the verdict. And for Kody Brown, escape was not an option. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Session 7 opened. Weeks of incendiary testimony, forensic proof, sobbing confessions, and contentious showdowns had all built up to this last instant. The trial of Kody Brown, the erstwhile self-styled patriarch of a sprawling polygamous brood and reality TV personality, had held the world's attention. Cameras from all major networks were lined up outside. Twitter was on fire with rumors, and long lines of people waited in line for hours, just to catch a glimpse of what was happening. Everybody knew that by the end of the day, Kody's fate would be decided, and that verdict would end his life as he knew it, or give him one final chance at redemption. The courtroom was packed when the bailiff announced, "All rise." The judge strode in with dignified authority, his black robe flowing behind him. The jurors followed one by one, each a mask of careful blankness, concealing the burden of the choice they had deliberated over for the past 3 days. To many of them, the case had grown into something greater than an issue of law. It was a morality story, a tale of power, greed, betrayal, and the breakdown of trust. Kody was seated at the defense table, still. He was dressed in a charcoal suit, the same one he had worn the first day of trial. But now it was loose on his body. His neatly coiffed hair was messy, and creases etched across his face testified to late nights and growing fear. Gone was the confident, charismatic figure who used to preach family harmony on TV. In his place stood a man drained by the burden of his own decisions, and the realization that the life he had so carefully constructed could come crashing down on him at any moment. In the corner of the room, Christine, Janelle, and Meri sat together. They hadn't said much to one another in years, but the trial had forged an unexpected alliance among them, a common knowledge that they all were victims of the same deceit. Christine clutched Janelle's hand firmly. Meri kept her gaze straight ahead, face impassive, but the occasional clenching of her jaw gave away the turmoil of emotion below. Robyn, who was legally still married to Kody, sat several rows behind, holding a tissue. Her loyalty had been pushed to the limit. She had waited for him longer than anyone, but even she now wasn't certain what to believe. The judge began. Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict? The courtroom grew quiet. The jury foreperson, a middle-aged woman with piercing eyes and an untroubled face, rose from her seat and nodded. We have, Your Honor. Please hand the verdict form to the bailiff. The document was passed down, and the judge looked at it for just a moment before returning it to the foreperson. Will the defendant please rise? Kody stood slowly, his hands shaking a little at his sides. He looked back over his shoulder briefly, his eyes catching Robyn's. She gave a weak tear-stained smile, but it did nothing to reassure him. Christine and Janelle didn't even look at him. They had come to terms with whatever was going to happen. The gavel would come down, and so would the man who had once dominated their lives. The foreperson cleared her throat and started reading. On the charge of wire fraud, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kody Brown, guilty. There were gasps around the room. Kody shut his eyes, a sigh escaping his lips as if the word itself had punched the air out of his lungs. On the charge of financial misappropriation, we find the defendant, guilty. The mutters grew louder. Janelle held Christine's hand firmly. Meri took a tremulous breath. Robyn's face contorted as tears streamed down her cheeks. On the charge of identity theft for the illegal use of Janelle Brown's and other signatures, we find the defendant guilty. By the time they read the last charge, conspiracy to commit fraud, the room had risen into a tidal wave of whispers and gasps and clicking cameras. Count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Guilty. Kody's knees gave under him, and for an instant it looked as though he was going to fall. Victor Hale, his lawyer, put a supporting hand on his shoulder, but it was an empty gesture. The trial was finished. The jury had rendered their verdict, and it was shattering. The judge thanked the jury for their time and dismissed them before directing his attention back to the courtroom. Mr. Brown, he said, his tone stern but measured, you have been convicted on all charges. Sentencing will now proceed. The courtroom grew quiet again as the judge read through the charges and the suggested punishments. The prosecution had requested the maximum 15 years in federal prison, citing the scope of Kody's fraud, the number of victims, and the long-term economic and emotional damage he had inflicted. The defense, holding on to the slimmest hope, had pleaded for mercy, describing Kody not as a hardened criminal, but as an imperfect human being. But before sentencing, both sides were allowed to make final statements. Prosecutor Elaine Carter rose first. Your Honor, this case was never just about money. It was about betrayal. Betrayal of trust, betrayal of family, betrayal of the very people who believed in him. Mr. Brown used his position of power to manipulate, to deceive, and to enrich himself at the expense of those closest to him. He didn't merely steal millions of dollars, he stole futures, dreams, and decades of trust. A light sentence would send a perilous message that this kind of betrayal can be swept under the rug. We urge the court to impose the maximum sentence provided by law. Now it was the turn of the defense. Victor Hale rose slowly, his voice full of resignation. Your Honor, my client accepts the verdict and the seriousness of the circumstances. He is not a seasoned criminal. He's a father, a husband, and a man who made horrible mistakes while under extreme pressure. We don't condone his behavior, but we plead for compassion, for the benefit of his children, who still adore their dad, and for the chance of rehabilitation. He is not beyond redemption. Lastly, the judge spoke to Kody. Mr. Brown, you are entitled to speak to the court prior to sentencing. Do you wish to make a statement? Kody hesitated for a long time. The room was so silent that the faint hum of the ceiling lights could be heard. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and hoarse. A far cry from the booming, confident tone that had once commanded his family and captivated television audiences. I don't know where to start, he began. I never thought I'd be standing here. I know what I've done. I know I hurt people. People I loved. I thought I was doing it to keep my family safe. I thought I was creating something for them. But somewhere I lost my way. I got fixated on control, on being the person who kept everything together. And I lied. I broke their trust. For that, I'm sorry. Truly sorry. He looked at Christine, Janelle, and Meri. You all deserved better. I can't make what I did right, but I hope someday you'll be able to forgive me. Christine looked ahead, her expression impossible to read. Janelle slowly shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. Meri's mouth opened as if she had something to say, but she remained silent. Robyn cried outright. The judge inclined his head gravely. Mr. Brown, the court has weighed the evidence, the extent of your crimes and your confession. The scope of your deception was enormous. Your behavior was calculated, premeditated, and consistent over the course of decades. You betrayed the trust of those who were most close to you for selfish reasons. For that, there has to be a price to pay. He paused, his next words hanging in the air like an anvil poised to drop. It is the sentence of this court that you, Kody Brown, will spend 12 years in federal prison without parole. You must also pay $2.8 million in restitution to the victims. Specifically, Meri Brown, Janelle Brown, Christine Brown, and their children. The room exploded. Christine placed her hands over her face and cried silently. Janelle exhaled a shuddering breath, as though some burden she had borne for decades had at last been released. Meri brushed away a single tear, her face a blend of sorrow and vindication. Robyn cried hysterically, shaking all over. Kody remained rigid, his eyes blank and white. The guards approached him, cuffing his wrists with handcuffs. Metallic click reverberated throughout the courtroom, like a last period on the existence he had known. Glancing back for the last time, as he was taken away, he mouthed something hardly audible. I loved you, he whispered. All of you? There was no answer. Outside the court, the world waited. Reporters called out questions. Cameras popped and helicopters flew above. The news took over headlines in mere minutes. Kody Brown guilty on all counts. Reality star sentenced to 12 years in prison. Brown family betrayal. Justice served. But within the courthouse building, the aftermath was subdued, more complex. Christine, Janelle, and Meri remained seated together for a few minutes following the sentencing, none of them saying a word. There were no smiles, no euphoria. Justice had been delivered, but it didn't take away the hurt. It didn't reconcile the trust that was broken. It didn't return to them the lost years. Finally, Christine spoke. It's over, she breathed, as if to herself. Not yet, Janelle replied quietly. But it's a start. Meri nodded, tears running down her face. We got through him. That's something. As they rose and moved towards the door, there was an awkward sense of community between them, a camaraderie created not of love, but of mutual betrayal and survival. They'd been quiet for far too long. Now they were free. Robyn, who remained in her seat, observed as Kody was escorted out the side door by federal marshals. They locked eyes for a moment, a brief, agonized glance, before he vanished from sight. It marked the final chapter of an era, not only for the Brown clan, but for the man who had thought himself above reach. In the ensuing weeks, the tale consumed each news cycle. Documentaries were planned, book contracts were inked, ex-members of the family spoke out in interviews, truthfully discussing the manipulation, the economic abuse, and the psychological wounds. To many, Kody's fall was a warning. A reminder that no charm, fame, or dominance could shield anyone from the repercussions of their actions. But for the family, It was closer to home. It was about healing, about taking back their lives, about living without the looming shadow of Kody Brown over every move they made. They had been held together by his authority long enough. Now they were held together by something different. The common resolve to rebuild from the ashes he created. And as the courtroom doors closed for the final time, the ringing of the gavel still echoing in the air, one truth predominated all. The man who used to think that he could manipulate everything, money, family, fate, had ultimately lost control. And in losing it, he had given the very people he had betrayed something more precious than money. He had given them back their freedom. The chapter was finished. The jury was in. And the saga of Kody Brown, a story once of devotion and domesticity, would always be remembered as a tale of deception, righteousness, and the ultimate cost of power misused.